It was a quiet morning in the market district of New Liberty. The sky was a pale blue, the sun just beginning to rise above the horizon. The city, though still new, was already alive with the hum of activity. People, both human and alien, bustled through the streets going about their day. Among them was Gavin Grayson, a chef who worked at one of the many stalls in the district. Gavin had worked in the market for 5 years. His stall was popular, serving hot meals to both humans and aliens, but it had its fair share of challenges. The market was a melting pot of different species: tall, insect-like beings with long antennae, short, furry creatures with multiple eyes, and sleek, elegant aliens who glided silently through the crowd. Despite the differences, they all had one thing in common: they were hungry. For Gavin, cooking was more than just a job. It was a passion. He loved the sound of the sizzling pans, the warmth of the fire, and the smiles that came with a well-cooked meal. But there was one thing he'd noticed recently, something strange that puzzled him. Every day without fail, a young alien girl would appear at his stall. She wasn't like most of the other aliens he served. She was small, with violet skin that shimmered in the light, and big bright eyes that seemed to glow in the dim market. She wore a tattered cloak that covered most of her body, and she always came alone. At first, Gavin thought she was just another customer. But then he noticed something strange. She never actually paid for her food. Instead, she would sneak around the back of the stall, taking a loaf of bread and some vegetables when no one was looking. He couldn't remember the exact moment he first saw her doing it, but it happened so many times that he began to recognize her pattern. Every day she'd show up at the same time, take the same food, and disappear into the crowd. At first, Gavin thought about reporting her to the market guards. After all, stealing was stealing, no matter who did it. But there was something about the girl that stopped him. She didn't look like a common thief. Her movements were cautious, almost afraid. And when she took the food, it wasn't greed he saw in her eyes, just a quiet desperation. For days, Gavin watched her from a distance, wondering what was going on. He couldn't ignore the feeling that something was wrong. She didn't act like the other thieves he had seen over the years. He began to notice other details about her. She was thin, too thin, and her clothes were ragged. There was a sadness in her eyes that made him wonder if she was hiding from something. One evening, when the sun began to set and the market was quieter than usual, Gavin decided to follow her. He had to know what she was doing with the food. After all, he wasn't just a chef. He was a man who cared about people. If she was in trouble, maybe he could help. He waited until she came again, as usual, slipping behind his stall and taking the food. He followed her at a distance, making sure she didn't see him. She moved quickly, darting through the crowds, looking over her shoulder every now and then. Eventually, she reached a dark alley at the edge of the market, a place where the light didn't quite reach, and stopped in front of a run-down building. Gavin kept his distance, staying hidden behind a crate as he watched her approach the door. The girl hesitated for a moment, then knocked 3 times softly. The door creaked open and a frail hand reached out to take the food from her. It was the hand of an older alien woman, her skin pale and sickly. The girl placed the food gently into her hand, speaking in a soft voice that Gavin couldn't hear from his hiding spot. For a long moment they stood there, locked in some kind of silent understanding. Gavin could see the older woman's face, drawn with age and illness, but her eyes held a flicker of recognition when she took the food. The girl seemed to brighten in her presence, her face softening into a rare smile. But Gavin could also see how tired the girl looked. Her shoulders sagged under the weight of what she was carrying, both physically and emotionally. Suddenly, the older woman reached out and pulled the girl into a hug. Gavin felt a knot tighten in his chest as he watched the scene unfold. The girl, the thief, wasn't stealing for herself. She was doing it for someone else. For her mother. Gavin stayed in the shadows, not sure what to do. He felt a pang of guilt. He had assumed the girl was just another hungry thief, trying to get by in a tough world. But now, seeing the mother, seeing the tenderness between them, he understood. She wasn't stealing to survive. She was stealing to help someone she loved, someone who needed her. Gavin's mind raced. Who was this woman? What had happened to her? Why was she so sick? He knew he couldn't just ignore what he had seen. The next day, Gavin found himself standing behind his stall, his mind on the girl. As usual, she appeared just before noon, slipping around the back of the stall to take her usual food. But this time, Gavin didn't stay hidden. He stepped out from behind the counter, holding a fresh loaf of bread and a bowl of soup. She froze when she saw him, her bright eyes locking onto his. He could see the fear in her eyes, as if she were preparing for a confrontation. "I see you've been taking food," Gavin said, his voice calm but firm. "But I don't think you're stealing for yourself." The girl's eyes widened in surprise. She opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. She lowered her gaze, embarrassed, and for a moment, the air between them was thick with tension. Gavin took a step closer, holding the food out toward her. "This is for you," he said softly. "For your mother. You don't have to steal anymore." The girl looked up at him, her eyes filled with confusion and a deep sense of gratitude. She didn't speak, but she reached out slowly and took the food from him. She held it in her hands, looking at it as though she couldn't believe it was real. Gavin smiled, but his heart ached for her. "You don't have to do this alone," he said, his voice gentle. "You're not the only one who cares. I'll help however I can." For the first time, the girl's face softened. She nodded and without a word turned and hurried back to the alley, clutching the food close to her chest. Gavin stood there watching her go. He had no idea what was ahead, but he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't just stand by and do nothing. This concludes part 1 of the story. The narrative sets up a compelling emotional journey, showing Gavin's decision to help a struggling alien girl and her mother, revealing that their story is more complex than it initially seemed. I'm glad you're interested. Here's the first part of the story, which is written in third-person style in simple English, with a focus on keeping it engaging while avoiding any inappropriate content. The days that followed felt strange to Gavin. He couldn't stop thinking about the alien girl and her sick mother. Every time he stood behind his stall, cooking meals for his customers, his mind wandered back to the alley where the girl had disappeared. He had always lived a simple life: work, eat, sleep, but now he couldn't shake the feeling that he had to do more. It wasn't enough to just give her food. She needed help, and Gavin had to figure out how he could provide it. The next few days, the girl continued to show up, just as she had before. She was always careful, always quick, but now when she reached the stall, Gavin noticed something different. Her eyes, which had once been full of fear and hesitation, were now softer. She still looked tired, but there was a sense of relief in her movements. She didn't just take the food anymore, she waited for him to offer it first. And every time she would take the food and silently disappear back into the shadows. But something was missing. Gavin didn't know if it was guilt or perhaps curiosity, but he couldn't leave things the way they were. He needed answers. Who was this girl? Who was her mother? Why was she so sick? He had to know more. One evening, as the market started to quiet down, Gavin made a decision. He couldn't just sit around wondering. He had to see the mother. Maybe he could do something for her, something more than just food. As soon as he closed up his stall, he headed toward the alley where he had seen the girl disappear. It wasn't long before he found it again. The alley was dark, tucked away from the main streets, a place where the light didn't quite reach. Gavin stood at the entrance for a moment, looking down the narrow path. He could hear faint voices coming from further in. The girl was there, just as he had expected. He walked quietly, careful not to disturb the peace of the street, until he found the familiar building where she had gone before. The door was still slightly ajar, and Gavin could see the girl's silhouette through the crack. She was kneeling beside the older woman, who looked even worse than before. The woman was lying on a worn mat, her eyes closed as she rested. Gavin's heart sank as he watched the girl carefully prepare the food. She held the loaf of bread in her hands almost reverently, before breaking it in half and handing one piece to her mother. The woman accepted it, her hands shaking as she took the food. Gavin watched them for a long time, his chest tight with emotion. It was clear to him now that this was more than just a girl taking food to her sick mother. This was a story of survival, of love and sacrifice. The girl had been doing everything she could, living in the shadows to keep her mother alive. Gavin could see the toll it had taken on her, how much she had lost just to keep her family together. He didn't know how long he stood there, but eventually the girl turned her head, as if sensing his presence. Her eyes met his from across the room, and for a moment time seemed to stand still. Her gaze was different now. There was no fear, only a quiet acceptance. She had known all along that someone was watching her, and now it was clear that Gavin wasn't a threat. He was someone who cared. Without a word, the girl stood up and walked toward him. She didn't speak, but her movements were calm and purposeful. She stopped a few feet away, looking up at him with a mixture of gratitude and something deeper, something almost like hope. "I know you've been helping us," the girl said, her voice soft but clear. Gavin could barely believe she was speaking to him in such a way. He had never heard her talk before. "You've been giving us food, and I can't thank you enough," Gavin shook his head. "You don't need to thank me," he replied, his voice gentle. "I want to help more. I can't just stand by and do nothing." The girl hesitated for a moment, then looked back at her mother. She seemed to be weighing something in her mind. After a pause, she turned back to Gavin and said, "My mother is very sick. She has been for a long time. It's a disease from my home world. The sickness doesn't have a cure. We've tried everything, but nothing works." Gavin felt a sharp pain in his chest. It was one thing to give food. It was another to know that nothing could cure her mother's illness. But he wasn't about to give up just yet. "I'm not a healer," Gavin said slowly, "but I've learned a lot over the years. There's always a way to help. Sometimes it's just a matter of finding the right medicine, the right food, the right care. Let me try." The girl stared at him as if trying to understand his words. She looked uncertain, but there was something in her eyes, something that made Gavin believe she was willing to trust him. "You would help us?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," Gavin replied firmly. "I will do whatever I can. I can't promise a cure, but I can promise that I'll try." The girl stood there for a long moment as if considering his offer. Finally, she nodded. "Thank you." Gavin felt a rush of relief wash over him. It wasn't much, but it was a start. "I'll need to gather some supplies," he said. "Different herbs, maybe something from the medical experts in the city." "I'll start tomorrow." The girl nodded again. "I'll bring her here every day, please. Please don't let her die." "I won't," Gavin said, his voice steady. "I promise I won't." The girl left quietly, disappearing into the darkness of the alley with her mother. Gavin stood there for a moment, watching them go. His heart was heavy, but a sense of determination filled him. He had promised to help, and he wasn't going to back down now. The journey ahead. Over the next few days, Gavin worked tirelessly. He visited medical experts, consulted with other chefs who specialized in alien foods, and even searched through ancient texts for any clue that might help the alien woman. He was willing to try anything. It wasn't just about food or medicine, it was about hope. It was about doing the right thing. Every day the girl came to see him. She would wait quietly outside the stall, watching him with a mixture of curiosity and anticipation. It was clear that she had begun to trust him. But there was always that look in her eyes, an unspoken fear that her mother might not survive. Gavin didn't have all the answers, but he was determined to find a way. He knew that together they could overcome this. He had always believed in the power of human resilience, and now he was starting to see that resilience was not limited to just humans. It existed in all species, in every form of life. The path ahead would not be easy. There were no guarantees, no promises that everything would work out. But one thing was certain. Gavin had made a choice, and he would see it through, no matter what.